Hi everyone! We are going to take you on another virtual tour here today at the Missouri Botanical Garden. I'm Christina, I'm here with Cassidy, and right now we are starting this tour in the Japanese garden. We're standing on the Koi Bridge, where there's a really nice vantage point to see quite a few things that are in bloom from a distance, but just to give you an idea of some of the things that you would see walking through the Japanese garden right now. So for one thing, there are still some azaleas in bloom. Some are past their peak, but you can kind of see a little bit of pink here from one variety that is still blooming. Here we have fringe trees, which are a really neat tree that have these thin, wispy type of blooms that is, I assume, where the name fringe tree comes from. And then what kind of dogwood did you say these were, Cassidy, here?
So that should be a Kusa dogwood, which is just an Asian relative of the Missouri native dogwood, which is past its peak and done. So those are that's what's giving you that pop of white there. And this vantage point, I just love this spot, like not only because we've got it's a good place that a lot of people stop because of the koi, especially if you're here with kids, but it just gives you a real sense of space here in the Japanese garden, looking out across the lake with the zigzag bridge and all these different layers. So we're seeing the layers of the irises, the water irises that are starting to come in along the bridge, and then you have that secondary layer with the Kusa dogwoods and the azaleas and things, and then you go beyond that to some of the pines and other trees, some Japanese maples. That's what the darker sort of darker scarlet is, and then even beyond that into the trees in the neighborhood on Alfred Avenue that have sort of were borrowing into this landscape view here. So it's a really nice view, and I don't know, this just feels like that sort of like high spring, early summer. Everything's green now. I feel like 2 weeks ago when we did a tour with Christina, things still weren't green yet.
Or they were just starting to be, yeah. But it's definitely been recent.
Yeah.
And
that's not even what we came out here.
No.
Here for.
The real star in this area right now is the peonies, which we are coming up on. There are quite a few of them here in the Japanese garden, as you can see, coming into bloom right now. And I mean, I would say these are at their peak,
yeah,
or close to it. And you can see there are still some blooms to come.
Yeah, but we're at more than 50% bloom here, and just like so many of our other collections, it's sort of timed so that not everything is blooming at once. So you can actually see here, I think these are the fruits after the fact starting to form. So this would have been a variety that has already bloomed and is passed, and then you have obviously the things that are in flower, and then you have all these buds getting ready to open. I think peony buds are almost as photogenic as the flowers themselves when they open, because they're just got that sort of oversaturated peak of color coming through, like you know what's coming, but it's not fully open yet. So that always kind of gets me excited when the peonies are getting ready to bloom. But you see that as we walk through the collection. You'll see some flowers that are a little bit past, and some that are obviously at peak and fully open, and then some that are still waiting to open. So but I would say if you are a peony fan, if this is the thing that that brings you out to the garden, the thing you like to see every year, this is probably the week to do it. You know, these big flowers, one thing they sort of have going against them is they get kind of delicate when they get all the way open, and so wind and rain can make a mess out of them. So luckily we haven't had too much of that recently, not with all those real hot days last week. Sort of see these flowers are a little bit past, but you can see the fruits forming within the flower before all the petals and everything have fallen off. I've never seen that before, but that's just sort of neat, where you can sort of see them start to swell up into what will eventually be those fruits. We were showing those a little earlier, but there's some here, so that's kind of neat. It gives you a view of the process. Here's again something that's a little bit more fully formed. The petals and everything are gone here, but I've never seen that, where you can see them starting to form within the flower before the flower is fully gone.
You can see some pops of color up here on the left. These are some of those azaleas that I was mentioning that are still blooming. So there are still quite a few actually still in bloom. So just similar to what Cassidy was just saying about the peonies, there are all different varieties, so they're not meant to bloom all at once. So now we're on that kind of later end of the azaleas.
Yeah, and so we've got a really high concentration of peonies in this border here in the Japanese garden. But there are peonies in other places a little bit more spread out that you can find throughout the garden. The Lehmann Rose Garden, I know, has some peonies. We walked past some. Sort of over by the Sachs Museum and Herring House, there are some peonies and roses there as well.
So we've made our way around the shore of the Japanese Garden Lake. We're turning now into the English Woodland Garden, which is a great spot this time of year when everything's starting to become green, like we were talking about earlier. That's kind of just started to happen here in St. Louis in the past few weeks. But with some of the foliage relatively newly coming in, there's a lot of things that are still flowering that have been able to get sun without being totally shaded out. So here in the English Woodland Garden, there are more of those azaleas, like we mentioned, for example.
And lots of things that like it shady this time of year and won't bloom until later, like hostas. That don't even bloom at all that like it shady, like the ferns. this is just a really nice place. I think, see, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think this might be a peony here. It has all the characteristics. There's those little fruits forming in the center of the flower. So this one's a little bit past, but as I was saying, there's spots throughout the garden right now where you'll see peonies that are coming into bloom. So that's a tiny little one there on the side of the path. Yeah, here's a nice little grouping of ferns and hostas right here at the other entrance.
It's a great area to spend some time walking through on some of these hotter days as well, with all the shade.
This is really neat. This is a giant dogwood. I think this is past flowering. Yeah, you can see the bracts are starting to fall off of these clusters here at the end. But even not being in full flower, you kind of get a sense of the effect. I mean, this tree is massive for one thing. Much bigger than the dogwoods that most people are used to seeing. But you get a sense of sort of what it was like at peak, which was probably just last week, and it's still retaining a lot of that color just from all those clusters of flowers.
We're walking now into the Lehmann Rose Garden, where we ended our last virtual tour. And at that time we were visiting to show off the azaleas. And we mentioned that it was right on the edge of really bursting into full bloom with the roses and some of the other later in spring flowers. So now it's been a couple weeks since that, and it has made good on our promise. It is looking absolutely beautiful right now. So we wanted to make sure to walk through and take a peek. When we were last in here a few weeks ago, the ornamental onions were just starting. Now they're just ending, yeah. But you can see
but lots of other things coming.
Yes.
I think this is foxglove here. Right off the bat, and I always like looking at we were just talking about this, what's here, what's past, what's about to be here. So I see lots of lilies. I see the foliage, sort of the towering foliage that's come up. So those will get ready here in the next few weeks. To join the show, there's all these really pretty purple irises.
Looks like there's a lot of purple and white going on, pink as well.
Really nice color scheme.
It is.
Those are all peonies, the big poofy white balls that you see are mostly peonies. There are some little roses that are coming into flower as well. This is a rose garden after all. There are roses here.
And you can smell them on the air too, by the way. I wanted to mention for anyone who does come to the garden, definitely be sure to stop by in person here, because the smell of the roses is very fragrant right now. And just, this is beautiful. This color here, the red, purple, white, pink, just a lot of really bright colors coming into bloom right now, all at once in this garden. And we're passing by some of these roses. We'll get up close on at least a couple here, since it is the rose garden after all.
I like this view as well, looking back. Looking back this way, we've got the nice shady spot and the little fountain. You can take a break, but yeah, you just sort of take it all in. This garden is just really phenomenal as it changes seasonally, and Matthew Norman, who is the rosarian that takes care of this, and Gladney Rose Garden does an excellent job keeping this all in good shape. The other rose garden as well, the one that's closer to the entrance, looks phenomenal right now. That one is very rose centric, a little bit more traditional, and it's bursting with colors right now as well.
Roses are another thing that really has just recently burst into bloom, and you'll see them everywhere around the garden, but especially in the rose gardens. So we are jumping around a little bit on this tour today, just to show you there really is so much in bloom. We don't have a ton of time to walk past everything, but this way we're able to show you things from all different areas of the garden. And we just noticed here in the Daylily Garden, while we were on our way to the irises, which we'll show you in just a minute, that some of these first daylilies are even starting to come into bloom. And these are, they usually do hit their peak in maybe June or July, yeah. So they're a little later.
The June flower. There are this one in particular is a species. So sometimes the species bloom a little bit earlier than the hybridized varieties. But this garden, I mean, we're talking about maybe 3 or 4 clumps of certain kinds of daylilies that are in bloom, and in about a month from now, a month to 6 weeks from now, this whole, everything you see here that sort of looks like little tufts of green grass sticking up is just going to be overwhelmed with so many different colors.
So this is definitely an area we're keeping our eye on.
Yeah, this is a great, if you're planning a June visit, this is definitely a space to stop by. We're just kind of seeing those early indicators that we're moving into summer as a handful of daylilies start to bloom. And I did want to mention, so I was here last week and I stopped and chatted with a member who was asking me what this plant was. She said it's gorgeous, and she'd never noticed it before. And I'm a sucker for labels, and most of our plants typically have the black label with the species name for people to read, and then there's also a zinc as well, a little metal tag that lets our staff know what the plant is and ties into our plant management system. I couldn't find either of those tags, but I told Jeanette that I would get an answer for her, and if I did, I would put it on this tour. So I found Travis Hall, who's the supervisor over the North Gardens here, and he told me that this is Colquitzia amabilis is the name of this plant. So I've actually seen this same plant in Tower Grove Park. I've never known what it was before. One of the common names is beauty bush, and I had say it certainly lives up to that common name. So, Jeanette, if you're watching, I got your answer for you. Sometimes it takes a little bit of searching, but every plant that we have here, with I think the exception of maybe some of the annuals that get traded out frequently, is tied into our living collections management system. It's mapped, and so there are resources available publicly online. That if you're here and you'd like to know what something is and you don't see it, you can look that up, and maybe we can drop that in the comments with this video, some links to those resources. But we've got our living collections management system, and also something called a plant mapper app, and I personally use those all the time. Even the irises here, Christina was telling me earlier, because I didn't know the number count, there's something like 1,200 different types of irises at the garden, and every single one of them is in that database, and it's mapped. But luckily every single one of these is also labeled so you can just see it.
And so we visited this garden as well on our last tour, and it was just beginning to have the first few blooms. Now it really is at its peak. The iris garden is one of the most beautiful areas when it is at peak. A lot of them flower all at once, as you can see, and it's just a rainbow of colors with irises. There's a really wide variety. So it's really kind of hard to capture on camera how good this looks in person.
What you can't capture on camera is the smell.
Yes.
It's like a beautiful lemony scent drifting through this space right now, and it's just fantastic.
And just such a wide variety, not only of color, but just a lot of other features of the irises as well. Like there are the tall bearded iris, the dwarf irises. Those are often earlier blooming. So now it's more of these taller ones. The scents vary from each other a bit too. And some have these really amazing details. I'm not sure if there's an actual term for these, but they just kind of look like brush strokes. So these are a great flower to just really spend some time walking around in here, taking in the variety and the detail and the smell, like Cassidy said. So I would say, much like if you are a fan of peonies, if you are a fan of irises, now's your time to come visit the garden. And for today's virtual tour, we'll leave you here in the iris garden. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope you're able to come see this in person. If not, we'll see you on our next virtual tour.